You're watching The Green Left Show. Thanks for joining us. Last weekend in the United States, 7 million people, the largest protest in US history by many accounts, people marched against the Trump regime. Also, in less than 2 weeks, we're likely to see the election of Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist candidate for mayor in New York. This comes in the context of a Trump regime which is out of control. They're launching assaults and attacks that are hard to keep track of on working class people, jobs and living standards, immigrants, immigrant rights, LGBTI community, civil liberties, free speech, a whole lot of things that are coming under attack. What does all this mean? Is the US going fascist? What will a Zohran Mamdani victory mean? How can we make sense of it all? No better person to talk to than Paul le Blanc, a long-time Marxist, activist, author and academic. We'll be talking to him shortly. Before we get underway, I do want to acknowledge that this show is recorded on stolen First Nations land, always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and we pay respect to elders and warriors past and present. Also, if you do like the work that we do, please do become a Green Left supporter if you're not already. Plans start from just $5 a month, and it is the number one way to support our work and also to receive the content that we produce. If you're not a supporter of Green Left already, please sign up today. There's a link at the Green Left website or in the video or podcast description for this episode of the Green Left Show. As I said, I'm here with US activist and author Paul le Blanc. I put it to him that the Trump regime in some respects represents continuity with the attacks of capitalist governments of the past, but in other respects the Trump regime is something new. I asked him to help us make sense of it and to outline for an international audience what are the contours of these attacks and what do they mean.
Well, the main contours, you've defined some of them. These are attacks on our very diverse and multifaceted working class, but focusing on identities of people, immigrants and folks who were born elsewhere and then moved here, people of color, people who have a different sexual orientation than Trump and some of the others think is appropriate, and so on. And why is this happening in the way that it's happening is I think a really good question. And some people may have very, clear, concise answers but with some of us, we've been wrestling with it because it is so different. And we'll talk about some of, some aspects of it later in tonight's discussion, I'm sure. I heard an analysis the other day that seemed to me to be right in a certain way. There is a decline in American capitalism. I mean, American capitalism is powerful, and the U.S. government and the U.S. ruling class still very powerful, but less so than they were. And that's one issue. And then they are not as able to provide as much of a decent living for growing sectors of the working class of our population, and that is impacting on the consciousness of many people who were they had felt, well, things are okay for me, and so I'll go along. But things are not okay for increasing numbers of people. There is growing disaffection. There's been a growing radicalization in the sense of not accepting the status quo, not accepting the way things have been for so long, not trusting our leaders, and not trusting the establishment, which has been, telling nice stories about what exists, but that doesn't correspond with what most people are experiencing and seeing. And so I think that Trumpism reflects those things. It's in order to maintain power and acquire power, Trump has attacked not only scapegoats of various kinds, the immigrants and trans people and people on the left and so forth, but um, he's um, take his big beautiful bill, which meant that the capitalist elite was going to be getting an infusion of even greater profits, but at whose expense? And it has to be at the expense of most of us in various ways. So, given that um, uh, growing disillusionment on the part of large numbers of people in the American way, what are you going to do? And Trump has set up scapegoats. He's developed a new kind of nationalism that reminds many of us of fascism, um, and that's part of what's happening. I think another couple of things that you have to look at is that there is a failure of liberals, to provide the promises, the golden promises of the New Deal and, the new frontier and the Great Society and all of that kind of stuff, uh, while denying that anything's wrong. They've bought into neoliberal economic policies, and that has existed for a long time. They've betrayed what many people had believed that they, were loyal to, which was, the kinds of ideas and ideals of liberalism when it stood for something more, um, or seemed to, like during the 1930s New Deal and in the years after that also. So the liberals have failed, and they've lost their base, and they're out of touch to a very large extent. I'm talking about the Democratic Party. Um, there's also a failure of the left, and the left today, compared to when I was younger in my 20s and 30s, the left is a shambles, and it's been hollowed out, and there are the different reasons for that. Some of the old timers, they're gone. They've died, and some of us who were young enthusiasts, we are now the old timers, um, and we have not replenished the left and not been able to replenish the left for various reasons. I think one of the reasons is sector after sector of the left has essentially gone over to the Democratic Party and has gotten involved in the Democratic Party reformism and is counting on the Democratic Party to be that beacon of reformism and of reform, when it's been betraying that more and more and more and more. And so the left and the liberals have not been able to provide any kind of meaningful alternative, for the most part, to people who are hurting and seeing that things are going badly, and they're looking for answers. They're looking for something. And Trump has pretended to be what they're looking for. He's their kind of guy, this shyster, bigoted billionaire. Um, but this is wearing thin now, and we'll get into that more later in this discussion. But I think these are some of the things that have caused the dramatic change in U.S. politics. U.S. politics could not have been sustained in these very different circumstances. And right now, or until recently, Trump has appeared to be an alternative to the status quo, with all kinds of promises of how he was going to make things better and so forth. And that hasn't been happening.
You mentioned the fascism word. I'm wondering how you would characterize the Trump presidency. Like, in particular, how serious do you think the danger of fascism is in the US? And is it enough to simply measure this against the classical examples of Hitler and Mussolini? Or do we need to analyze something new in this situation?
Well, I think that's I very much like the way you just put it. Um, I mean, there's a question. There are many things that I don't like. The things that I don't like include it goes way back, to those who defended slavery, and the Confederate States of America. Was that fascism? Does it make sense to, oh, that was fascism? There were various other bad things that have happened in our history and in the history. Is it all fascism? What does that word mean? And for me, it has a certain meaning connected with Hitler, Mussolini, the original fascism. Now, at the same time, I think there's a lot of commonalities in that fascism and what we're seeing now. Some of it, we've been seeing it for a long time. I mean, African Americans in this country have, for most of U.S. history, lived under you could say, under fascism, or you could say under extreme oppression, where the words democracy and freedom are hollow. Um, what about the Native American peoples who were subjected to genocide and destruction of their cultures and their lives? That existed from beginning at the very start. Um, so there are really horrible and negative aspects to our history. There's a lot of good stuff too, I would argue. Struggles for democracy, struggles for freedom, struggles for human rights and economic justice. That's also part of our history. But to just lump everything together as fascism, I mean, just normal capitalism has been bad enough. You don't need to call it fascist. However, um, as you indicated in your first question, there's some new things are happening, very different things are happening. A destruction of the democratic institutions, limited and flawed as they are, but that people fought for and struggled for, are being attacked and dismantled. A certain kind of standard of living that people grew to expect as, well, this is the way it should be, is being undermined and attacked and dismantled, and in a systematic way. I think that this is not certainly not a repeat of Hitler and Mussolini, um, but it is something new. It is something new, but it has certain things in common with some of the worst aspects of U.S. history and also certain aspects of fascism. So I don't call it fascism, but authoritarianism, ultranationalism, bigotry, et cetera. So there are a number of words that I would use. That's for sure.
People often say things like, oh, what the government's doing is crazy. And what leftists often will do is explain the rationale behind why the ruling class would carry out a particular set of policies. At the same time, there's no rule of history that says the ruling class always has to be right, or they can't make catastrophic mistakes even in their own interests. So, I mean, I guess you mentioned before about like wrestling with understanding this. I mean, I guess what do you think in terms of the ruling class interests? Do you think Trump is just some narcissistic buffoon who's got support in his base and they've kind of created a monster they can't control, or do you think that this is more of a the ruling class has made a judgment they want to break with the norms of the past. They want to escalate their attacks on working class people, and this is a sort of a deliberate ruling class push to try and achieve that sort of goal? Or even does it matter? Does it do we need to know the answer to that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's an important question. I think that we do need to have some grasp of what is the answer to that. And Trump certainly, in some ways, is a buffoon. That's and an idiot, a jerk. He's stupid. The video that he proudly made and showed of him wearing a crown and bombing most of us with excrement, uh, that was stupid, in my opinion. It doesn't make people laugh if they're hurting. And then, of course, there were millions of people involved in those protests. Um, I don't think that makes him look good. And there are various foolish and stupid things that one can attribute to him. And yet, at the same time, in a certain way, he's not stupid. And he has the support of very powerful, non-stupid, vicious, but non-stupid elements in the elite. And the bulk of the conservative movement and of the Republican Party that's going along with him, the people in the Heritage Foundation who designed, Project 2025 to assist him, although he was denying that he had anything to do with it. And he personally didn't have anything to do with it, but these are supporters of his and staffers and cadre and idea people that he needs in order to have power and in order to benefit from the corruption that he is engaging in and so on. He needs them. And he's in sync with them in many different ways. And this represents a section of the ruling class, not the entire ruling class. There are some elements in the ruling class who are absolutely against this, against what this represents, because it is short-sighted in a way. It's counterproductive, and the way that they want to do things is much more sophisticated. There's a question: will it work? Will that work? It hasn't been working that well so far. And sectors of the ruling class have gone over to Trumpism, and of the GOP, they've gone over to Trumpism because he has been able to gain a following. And then, what we saw of Trump in the first administration, which was awful, by then he had become, in my opinion, the worst president of the United States ever until now. Now, in the second version, he's really bad, really the worst in multiple ways. But this time, there is more method to the madness and to the buffoonery, and there's more. He's been accomplishing quite a bit on behalf of the ruling class, and the billionaires and the capitalists.
The whole Project 2025 feels like a very articulated ruling class plan, which they can use a buffoon to implement.
Absolutely. Now they are backing him because he seems to be able to get it done, and he's going with them because he needs them in order to maintain and advance his own interests, his own terrible interests. But there are people in the ruling class who see this as this is going to blow up in the faces of those who are advancing it, and they don't want that. They're smarter in some ways, although they're stuck with a system that is that is in decline, and if they want to maintain their profits, the kind of standard of living and the kind of power that they've become accustomed to, they can't provide the old New Deal, New Frontier, Great Society kinds of policies. Um, but they're not prepared to go Trump either. And so they're stuck, it seems to me, and they don't provide an alternative. But they see that Trumpism is not the way to go. So there's definitely a division, you know, in the ruling class and among capitalists, with many going to Trump, but some not.
The whole Project 2025 is clearly an articulated vision, but it feels like it's a bit of a gamble for the ruling class.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a gamble, and when you read through the document, they're flirting with, a kind of populism, a kind of radicalism. They don't really mean it, but they say the words, and how's this going to turn out? But it is much more coherent than Trump is capable of being, and it provides a coherence to his second administration that it's much greater than in the first.
Well, let's switch over to the other side, and not instead of the ruling class attacks. What about the popular fight back? I mean, just last weekend we saw the No Kings rallies, which were by many accounts the largest, or certainly one of the largest protests ever in the
They
U.S.
were they
history.
were the largest. They were the largest in U.S. history, and I've been, I mean, I was very much a part of the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War. I was young, but I was around for the civil rights movement. They were big demonstrations then, but 7 million people throughout the United States on one day. I mean, in Pittsburgh, this we had the largest action. I mean, there were at least 12,000 people in downtown Pittsburgh, and then in another section of Pittsburgh, there was another 3,000. So that's 15,000. And then in the suburbs, there were demonstrations also at the same time. So, it was 15, 20,000 people just in Pittsburgh, just in Pittsburgh. And then in other nearby towns and cities. And then, and this was replicated throughout the United States. 7 million people. 7 million people. Now, who were these people? And that's a good question. Well, I got to tell you, most of the people who were involved make a living if they're not retired. And if they're retired, they used to make a living by selling their ability to work for a paycheck, whether it was blue collar or white collar. And the American working class has been changing in all kinds of ways, but it's still very much there, even among people who don't think of themselves as, oh, I'm part of the working class. But that was the demonstration. It was intergenerational. There were people my age and some older. I'm in my late 70s, and older, and younger, and much younger. It was not, and there were people of color, uh, but not as many, not as many, um, and that's a limitation, I think, compared to the Black Lives Matter upsurge of a few years ago, for example, and so that's worth thinking about. These demonstrations were wide open in a certain way. They were all anti-Trump. They were all in favor of democracy and a constitutional republic uh, and free speech. And then there were a variety of other issues that were represented, including people worried about the economy. There were economic issues there, and a sense of, we're against the oligarchy and the billionaires, the kind of thing that Bernie Sanders has been articulating in various rallies around the country that has resonated among large numbers of people. So there's not from my standpoint as a Marxist, not adequate class consciousness, but an amazing outpouring and an embracing of a lot of the right kinds of ideas and issues. Um, and that's one thing. I mean, you also um, there is a large number of people. And by the way, I think that Trump, it's important to recognize, he was not elected by the American people. He was elected by a slim margin, and he didn't even at that time have the support of the American people for all that he stood for. He pointed out a number of things and made promises of, the price of food and housing and so forth. It's way too high, and I'm going to fix that. And he was lying. He's not going to fix it, and he hasn't fixed it. It's gotten worse. And so some of the people who voted for him probably wouldn't do it again. They're not comfortable with his video and other things that he's been doing. And then he hasn't come through on his promises. He lied, big tax breaks for the rich, and the rest of us are getting screwed. And growing numbers of people are feeling that. Um, and that is reflected in the demonstrations. Now, also on the issue of immigration, where he's also lost, I mean, people tended to approve of what he claimed he was trying to do, but they didn't sign up for the kind of thing that he's actually doing, which does remind one of fascism for sure. And there are growing numbers of people, and these are not left-wing radicals. These are religious people and just decent people who are opposed to what they're seeing with ICE, and have been signing up, been going to big meetings at churches, you know, with and getting information. How can we mobilize to protect, these families that are being hurt, these immigrant families that are being hurt, and to protect them from these stormtrooper ICE thugs?
I wanted to say with No Kings for a little bit because some of the commentary I've seen has. I mean, obviously, obviously it was a very strong and powerful mobilisation. But on the other hand, I've seen some commentary sort of talking about the sort of relatively conservative character of it. I saw one video of Code Pink people being hassled for holding a Palestine flag, and there was an article in Jacobin that was basically celebrating and being excited about the fact that patriotic symbols like the US flag were being brought over to the left. I guess, do you wonder? Did you notice any of that, or do you feel like the most important thing is the size of it? And do you see there's any danger of, I guess, US Democrats' influence in this sort of, I guess, conservatizing, having a conservative influence? Like,
I think that's a good question, and I all I can tell you is what I've seen. And different cities and different demonstrations, and the organization of different demonstrations has been different in different places. Here, there was not a squelching or a repression of Palestinian flags or people who were. It was not a conservative demonstration. Um, there was it was shot through it with radicalism, even if I mean, it wasn't clear. It was, general. There were a lot of American flags, absolutely. But for a lot of people, I mean, if it had been organized by a left-wing group, well, one thing is it would have been small. It would have been very small. This was big. This was big. And a lot of the people participating are not willing to give up the flag to the Trumpists and the right wing, and for them, the flag represents the real America, where everyone has opportunities and everyone has rights and so forth and so on. So that doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me. frankly.
Well, let's talk about also the ICE attacks. I mean, I know you're not in Chicago, but we've seen the images of the ICE agents descending out of the Black Hawk helicopter, and there seems like really vicious, incredibly vicious attacks by ICE. But there's also been like extremely impressive community mobilizations in response.
Yes. And an interesting thing. I mean, I think that's incredibly important, and I was starting to allude to it here. Now, here there's not as big an immigrant community, as big a Hispanic community, and so forth. But ICE is here; they are operating, and there are immigrants here, and there are people of color who are immigrants who are targets, for sure. And there's a response. I mean, when I talked about people, large numbers of people in churches, that's something that I went to here. The Presbyterian Church, that is huge. It's one of the biggest churches was filled with people who were listening to a guy from Casa San Jose, which is the one immigrant center in Pittsburgh, which has been leading and was overwhelmed by the large numbers of people who wanted to come and help. But when ICE shows up, there are calls that go out to various people in the network, and they converge on that area, and they observe, and there's not there's not the kind of militant fight back that we saw initially in Los Angeles, for example. This is, observing and being a pressure, and so forth, and trying to give some aid and shelter to those who are being victimized. I mean, there are some people, and again, not leftists necessarily, but good Christians who are harboring, as some did during slavery days, are harboring, the victims of oppression in their homes. That's happening, I think, on a large scale, and is important. Now, in some places in Chicago, I was at a meeting helping to plan one of the earlier No Kings demonstration. And it's impressive. I mean, this was held not in a church, but in the headquarters of the Teachers Union, Chicago Teachers Union, which is a great, union that has won important struggles in recent years in the schools. And but highly sophisticated, well organized immigrants, putting together, helping to put together the No Kings demonstration of that, the earlier one, and reflecting a level of organization in Chicago to defend immigrant rights at the same time. That's the struggle that these folks came out of. So it's somewhat different in different parts of the country. And one of the things that amazes me is the convergence, the other day, of 7 million of us. Now, where's it going to go is another issue, and as Trump, as Trump gets worse and does worse things, what's going to happen? And that's a good question. And then there's another question: what's after Trump? What comes after Trump? Going back to the good old days? It's the good old days, so-called, that resulted in Trumpism. It's the crises. So I anticipate that many people who are active now and are not necessarily socialists. Actually, some are in the process of becoming socialists, and then what are the socialists going to do? And the different notions among people who consider themselves socialists, what they should do. But going back to something like the good old days is not going to work. So that realization from experience is going to radicalize more people. So this is a very interesting process. This
Well, let's talk about that more specifically. I mean, what would you say about? I mean, you said earlier the left was in a shambles. I mean, can you talk about the process of building the socialist movement, and I guess explain in particular why it's not enough to why we need something better than just the U.S. Democrats? Like, why do we need to build a left wing alternative?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a couple of things. One is when I was when I was a lad back in the '60s. Of course, there was the New Left, and I identified with the New Left and SDS and so on. But aside from that, there were organized forces. There was what was left of the Communist Party, but there was something left of the Communist Party. They were functioning. There was something left of the Socialist Party, and they were influential. There was something. There were the Trotskyists, the Socialist Workers' Party, who played an amazing role. Uh, and there were radical pacifists who were highly organized and influenced by. They were left wing, revolutionary pacifists in many cases. Um, and that is to a large extent disintegrated and gone. Um, and we need that, and we need better than that. We need better than that. Um, and So, how do we get it? Now, I'm a member at this point. Last time I think we talked, I think I was a member of just one socialist organization, um, and that organization died. Uh, and now I'm a member of three organizations, two little ones that are, clearer on their politics. They're revolutionary socialist groups, Tempest Collective and Solidarity, but they're small. And I decided to join Democratic Socialists of America, which has, at this point, about 80,000 members. And I think when all of this is done, it'll have more. Now, of those members, many of them are just paper members. It has been estimated that only 10% are truly active. Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. When I go to DSA meetings in Pittsburgh, there are between 50 and 80 people there. Now, they're not the old, highly organized, disciplined cadres. Some are inclined to be that, but most are not. But it's a learning process. There is a learning process going on, and in DSA, but beyond DSA. And one of the ways that people are learning is not through study groups, although there are study groups, and that's good, that's important, but through struggle, through being involved in actual struggle and attempting to reach out to more and more people to talk about the issues and draw them into a struggle to win victories, to win reforms in the here and now as best we can, and being clear, but the problems go beyond whatever victories we can win right now. There's a bigger victory down the road that we've got to win. We've got to transition this economy from this awful inegalitarian mess where the rich are living off the suffering of the rest of us and enriching themselves at our expense. That's got to be replaced by an economy in which all of us is a democratic economy. All of us own and control the resources that we need and share in the labor and share in the fruits of our labor. And some of us call that socialism or communism. That's what we need. We need to go beyond capitalism. Now, most of the people who think that way now didn't think that way 10 years ago. Some of us did, but there are many more people coming into the struggle through the Occupy movement first. It was, which was more nebulous than this, and the Black Lives Matter movement, which was better in some ways, clearer, but still there was a lot of nebulousness. And now this stuff. There's a process. We have to see if we want to build a socialist movement. Well, we could stand aside from all of this impure nonsense and develop, pure slogans and so forth, and history will continue to unfold while we're standing there with our purity. No, we've got to engage in real struggles that make sense to people as socialists. I mean, Marx and Engels outline what needs to be done in the Communist Manifesto. That's what needs to be done, where we see many of the problems and many of the sources of the problems and the forward march that it's going to take, but we're engaged in the actual struggles of more and more people today. And there's that interplay. Rosa Luxemburg put it beautifully. She said that reform is the means to advance the goal, which is revolution. So building, rebuilding, and then building even better, the kind of socialist movement we need, that's essential. That should not be put off to the side. That has to be integrated in all that we're doing. But what we're doing has to be engaging in these kinds of seemingly nebulous struggles. In some ways, they are nebulous.
Talking about engagement, let's talk about Zohran Mamdani, who is probably seen by most people as the most one of the most high profile examples of people talking about socialism today's world. I mean, or at least in the US today. Tell us what your impressions are of the movement around him.
Yeah.
And more broadly, can you talk about the tactic of running in the US Democratic primaries?
Yes, and those are two very important questions, and there's a complexity to them. Let's take Mamdani first. I support him. I'm for his campaign, which is an amazing campaign, which is having an impact and the right kind of impact on lots of people. And there are a number of things that are very impressive about him. Now, there are limitations that are very important, but it is exciting that he has been able to generate the kind of support that he's generated, and not just people passively supporting him or thinking, oh, that's nice, but actively supporting him, which is what it is taking and will take for him to win the election. And the ideas that he's putting forward, I mean, first of all, he says he's a socialist, a democratic socialist. That has some meaning. Now, it can have different meanings. It can be very nebulous. What does it mean? But it gets people to thinking about capitalism and the need for alternatives to capitalism. If he wins, is that going to be an alternative to capitalism? No. He's going to be the mayor of a capitalist city in a capitalist society. And in order to be mayor, and especially if he's running the Democratic Party, which is a capitalist party, controlled by capitalists, in favor of programmatically and all kinds of other ways. Now, there are good people in the Democratic Party, and there are people who believe in socialism in the Democratic Party. Mamdani is one of them. But the Democratic Party is not our party. If I was in New York, I would vote for the socialist Mamdani. Um, and on the other hand, voting for the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party, the actual leadership, the Democratic Party establishment, they're not for me. They're not for us. They're for themselves and for their big funders and so forth. And the best they want is to go back to the good old days, which were very problematical. Um, for the most part, there are some differences, and Mamdani represents a difference. So let's say that, and by the way, what he's saying is, uh, you know, free childcare and free public transportation, and well, this is a big deal. What he's saying, if he implements it, um, it's going to make a difference in the quality of life for people, providing food where there are food deserts, make sure that there's decent food available, affordable food. It's all good stuff. It's what a revolutionary socialist should be saying to many people. This is what we want. This is step number one. It's only step number one. Then there's got to be two and three and four to get to what we need. But we want this. Absolutely. And people are excited about it. Yeah, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, tax the rich, he says. Well, okay. Now, is he going to do that and be able to do that? Is he going to be able to come through on his program? Is a good question, because the capitalist class is not in favor of him succeeding. And the Democratic Party leadership some of it's kind of gone along because they have to, because their base has gone in that direction. He's made certain compromises for sure, and he's going to probably make more. And it may be that he's going to make so many compromises that he's going to be like all the rest of them. If he's going to be true to what he's promised, that's going to mean a struggle. That's going to mean a militant mass struggle to win it. And then people become further politicized and radicalized. If he caves, if he sells out, well, that'll be a lesson. And at least some people who were supporting him, and in the name of socialism, will conclude that doesn't work. That's not the way to go. So either way, it seems to me it's worth supporting this campaign, engaging with it, in a not just a passive way, but in an actual way, and helping to push it forward to be true to itself. And then we'll see. And then we'll see. So that's some of what I think. Now, I've expressed myself on the Democratic Party, and actually, I'm 70. How old am I? I'm 78. I've been around a long time. I've read lots of books. I've written some books. I've been engaged in many struggles. And one thing that I find is I don't know it all. I keep getting surprised, I mean, initially when I heard about the Occupy movement, the idea, the concept, I thought it was stupid. It didn't make sense. And then I saw what it was, and oh, yeah, I became part of it, definitely. Did it go far enough? Of course not. It couldn't. It couldn't at that point. Um, but I get surprised by things. Um, I had felt that Bernie Sanders, his two campaigns were good, and I was supportive of them. But and the idea of socialists running on the Democratic Party ticket, I thought, well, that's worth a shot. I mean, Sanders would not have had the impact that he had, just running as a little protest campaign. I've been involved in many of those, uh, and been a candidate in many of those, and I don't feel bad about them. I feel good about them, but certain things were accomplished. But it seemed to me, and there were some comrades and friends who had some who were sort of sectarian. Oh, never, never, never. But there were some who were seduced by it, in my opinion, and some of them are still seduced by it. And it seemed to me this has a shelf life. That is to say, socialists in the Democratic Party, at a certain point, they're going to face the Democratic Party establishment, and they're either going to sell out or they're going to be kicked out. And it doesn't mean, oh, it was all a stupid idea. Certain things would be accomplished that way. But it seemed to me about a year ago, it had run its course. Socialist work, and then Mamdani, and suddenly, whoa, well, this is interesting. Let's see how this plays out. And, I've expressed myself on what I think of it. And yet, when he wins, he's going to be up against in an impossible situation. And you're not going to have socialism in one city. And so they're gonna have to be developments throughout the country of that scale to give New York the kind of support that it needs. Well, that's probably not going to happen, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, and there already is a lot of pressure on him. Um, but we'll have to see. We'll have to play it out and see how it goes. And some of us need to be true to the best in his campaign and to ourselves as socialists and be honest.
It seems to me it's very complicated to work it out and realize because, on the one hand, we've all seen the lessons of the Democratic Party, like at the graveyard of progressive movements. On the other hand,
Absolutely.
we need to remember that, like, people like Father Gapon, who probably most people listening wouldn't even heard of, but was the priest that led a very obsequious, timid, cowardly petition against the Russian Tsar in 1905, sparked a movement that he didn't intend, but it went
Yes,
along.
I mean, we'll see. I hope he turns out great. I hope that I still have some hopes for Bernie, for that matter. But Sanders has tended to, speak a good line and very critical of the Democratic establishment, and then pull people back into the Democratic Party. Well, that's not so hot. AOC, has been wonderful in some ways, but has made one compromise that Mamdani hasn't made, and I don't anticipate that he's going to make it, is on Gaza and Palestine. I mean, he has softened some of his formulations, but he's in favor of Israel with equal rights for all. Well, that's a non-Zionist state, and he knows that. He's not, so he has remained true to that essential foreign policy element. And we'll see. I mean, I'm not saying, oh, he couldn't sell out even on that, but we'll see. We'll have to see. Um, and what you said about Father Gapon and that movement, I think is well taken, and we can find other examples also. Uh, so that's kind of how I see it. We need a more unified revolutionary socialist organization in this country, which is why I'm not a member of just one at this point, because there isn't one. So how to build it, and it seems to me that elements from Tempest, elements from Solidarity, there are some other such groups, elements from DSA, if not all of DSA, but there are left There are left and revolutionary elements and currents and forces inside of DSA. And among all of these, I disagree with people on a number of things. Well, so what? What we're talking about doing is building a revolutionary party that needs to be democratic, to discuss the differences and to test out the different perspectives, and then based on that, develop a perspective that is even better. That's what we need. We don't have that, and I'm talking about a smaller group than what we're going to need ultimately. But um, so how to bring that about is another thing that I wish I could say. Well, what we got to do is one, two, three, and then we'll have it. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Except I do know I, as much as I'm able now, need to be involved and engaged in talking about what we believe in and doing things, being involved in actual struggles. That's essential. I feel like I have limited time now, myself personally, but as much as I can, I want to see, whoa, what happens next? And then what do I think we should do? It's an exciting time right now.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Sure. Okay. Take care.
Thanks again for joining us. That brings us to the end of this episode of The Green Left Show. Big thank you to Paul le Blanc for sharing his time with us today, and a big thank you to you for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, if you like our work, please do become a Green Left supporter if you're not already. It is the number one way to support our work and to receive the content that we produce. But also, you can help us out without spending a single cent, simply by giving this video or podcast a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Help us spread the word, share it with your friends, help us build the audience for The Green Left Show. And in any case, there's plenty of things to do. We'll see you on the streets, and we'll see you next time on The Green Left Show.